Hello everyone and welcome to the second lecture for chapter 12. This is the first of two lectures that we're going to look at the Mongolian Empire specifically. And we've talked about the Mongols a little bit in this course already when we talked about the Seljuk Turks as well as the Russians and so forth. So we're going to kind of reiterate those points that we talked about earlier, but we're really going to focus on how the Mongolian Empire began and why it spread so far and wide very quickly, and what its impact was on Asia. All right, so let's get started. All right, so to understand the Mongolians and where they came from, you actually have to understand the geography that they lived in. They lived in what we call present-day Mongolia, which actually is the home of many different groups of nomadic people. We've already talked about the Turks in this course, as well as the Huns. They came from this Central Asian steppe region, just like the Mongols did. The Mongols were a little bit more to the east than the Turks or the Huns, but this is still kind of the same region that we're talking about. Now, geographically, the steppe is kind of a rolling hills area, very little rain, at times short grasses and very little trees. And you can see that here in this upper picture, as well as a little bit with the yurt blocking it in the lower picture. Because the steppe is centrally located on a continent, and you have very little trees and so forth, there's not really many big bodies of water around in this area. It means that you have very dramatic temperature changes, where it can be very, very hot during the day, but very, very cold during the night. And that's a big deal, because that means that you have a significantly harsh climate because of the weather. And this can be a very tough place to live in for people and for animals. So that's why these people are typically nomadic or live in smaller groups. Now, you're going to see movements typically to the west and to the south, mainly because you have milder climate. So it's better climate for people and animals to live in and things to grow. And then also you have more rain. So that's typically where you're going to see movements out of this region, and why the Huns or the Turks or the Mongols move in these directions from the steppe. All right, so typically, again, we're going to kind of link back to some of the first things we talked about in this course, like with the Bedouins or the Berbers, because we're focusing on a nomadic group of people. The Mongols were pastoralists. They were nomads that herded and tried to domesticate animals, and they followed seasonal patterns of movement. So basically, it was battling for two things: grasslands to feed their animals so they could have them healthy enough for food and other things, and water. Can't survive with food or water, obviously. And everything in their lives depended on these animals. Keeping them alive, being able to transport or move to different places where you had access to grass and water. Now, just like the Bedouins or the Berbers and the Seljuks and so forth, these people, the Mongols, they traveled together forming clans. Very harsh life. You had to be very skilled to defend yourself. And loyalty was a big thing. And these clans would actually work against each other or ally with different clans for strength. And you had very divided cultures here in the steppe. All right, here you can actually see, this is, we saw a picture of a yurt on the first slide that we lectured on. This is a graphic showing you how the Mongols would actually build their typical living dwelling. It's called a yurt, and typically the door would always face south, because they thought that good news came from the south. But this is a very similar, if you want to compare it to anything, I think it was the Native American teepee, allowing them to easily set it up and then tear down and move with the herds and so forth. All right, so the rise of the Mongols, this is the main focus that we're talking about here, the main topic. So in 1206, the Mongolian clans, a majority of them, were united by a man named Temujin. Now, when he unites them, and we'll read a document that actually kind of looks at this event, when he unites them, he takes the title of universal ruler, or Genghis or Genghis Khan. And from there, he's going to set out on a ruthless series of campaigns across Asia, whether it's to China, whether it's to Central Asia, and so forth. Now, he slaughters pretty much anybody who doesn't surrender to him. They destroy significant cities all across what is going to be known as the Mongolian Empire. In particular, the most important or most significant one is the city of Samarkand. We'll talk a little bit about that more, not in this lecture, but when we watch a video on the Mongolian Empire and so forth. But the Mongols were focused on expansion and gaining of vast riches. They're going to bring in large amounts of plunder into the empire under Genghis Khan and the Khans that follow him. So within a period of less than 20 years, Genghis Khan is able to control pretty much the entirety of Central Asia. So by 1225, he's going to have control of all of Central Asia as well as various parts outside of that as well. Now he is a conqueror. He's perhaps the greatest emperor really in all time in terms of scope of what he's able to accomplish in such a short period of time, but also in terms of the amount of area he's able to cover. And he was able to do this because of really three main traits. He was a very brilliant organizer, specifically for military means. He organized very small mobile armies. The Mongols were not high in numbers per se as like other cultures they'd come up against, like China, but they were very skilled warriors, and they used horses very effectively, as well as bows, as you can see here in the bottom and middle pictures. And Genghis Khan is in the upper left. Now, these armies were not only very loyal and trained and experienced, but they were led by very effective leaders as well if Genghis Khan wasn't present. So that was another benefit. He's also a very great strategist. He knew what the strengths and weaknesses of his troops were. Particularly, he would like to use the strategy of feint and attack. So basically, what he would do is he would use a small force to lure in a bigger force, either in a smaller battle or the more localized battle, or over a much grander scale, depending on which campaign you're looking at or which example, and basically drawing larger forces out, kind of spreading them out, and then springing a trap and kind of defeating them in detail. So that's a very, very big skill, a very important skill that used the mobility and accuracy and skill of the Mongolian warriors very effectively. He would also use siege technology very effectively as well when needed, because the Mongols, they wanted to use speed to the best of their ability. So when he had to lay siege, they would have to kind of end these sieges as fast as possible. One such thing that the Mongols did under Genghis Khan and other leaders of the Mongols was they would actually kill animals such as cows and then launch them into cities. And using those cows would cause disease to spread throughout these cities. You got to remember, they don't have modern medicine or modern sanitation. So in a lot of these places, or in all these places, really, so you can end sieges much more quickly if disease is spreading rampant, because they can't sustain that. So that was a huge tactic they used. And then also he was very cruel. He threatened to kill people or entire cities, destroy them, men, women, children, elderly, if they didn't surrender without a fight. And there was two reasons for this. One, the Mongols didn't have huge numbers, so he needed to maintain his soldiers as best as possible. Actually, three reasons. Two, he wanted to move as quickly as possible. And three, you only have to do this a few times, and then word gets out that you're very cruel and this could happen to your city, that Genghis Khan could do this to your city. And this is actually going to allow him to work off that second point that I just made, spreading the empire and taking over vast amount of lands very quickly. The cruelty is going to allow that to happen. Now, Genghis Khan dies in 1227. So you got to think of it too. He's expanded the empire to these great heights in just over 20 years. It's a hard campaigning life. He's grown up through a hard life, and so forth. So he gets taken by an illness and he dies. And we'll talk a little bit more about what happens with his death and so forth once we watch a movie or the video on the Mongolian Empire. So we'll save that for later. But he dies in 1227. Now you can see here, this is a map of Genghis Khan's empire. This is where it starts, spreads into northern China, all across Central Asia, and then there's going to be some inroads into the Middle East, the Caucasus, and into Russia and so forth. But those lands are going to come under control under other Khans. All right, so the empire is built in less than 50 years. The Mongolian Empire is able, as you can see on that map below, is able to control lands all the way from the Yellow Sea and the East China Sea and China all the way to Poland. It's the largest unified land empire in history. Okay, let's understand, largest unified land empire. The British are going to have a much bigger one that's going to stretch across the seas, but this is the largest unified one by land. They defeat China. He's able to invade Korea and take control, conquer all of Persia and so forth. So very, very big and quick building empire. Now, just like we've talked about in several instances throughout history, when a strong leader dies or passes rule on, typically that empire or kingdom or culture is not going to be as successful. That case happens here with Genghis Khan, but not in the same way that we kind of talk about with others. The Mongolian Empire is actually able to spread even more after his death, but ultimately becomes so large, the Mongols don't have one strong leader, but also at the same time, it's so big that you don't have modern technology and transportation and communication networks, that the empire can't stay together all under one. Control of one. I would liken this to, like, if you look at the empire of Alexander the Great, when he dies, the empire splits into 4 regions under control of people that knew him. The same thing happens here. The Mongolian Empire splits up into 4 different khanates, or regions or kingdoms ruled by a different descendant of Genghis Khan. The main one is the Khanate of the Great Khan. That houses the traditional Mongolian homelands as well as China. You can see it here. Then you have the Khanate of Chagatai, Central Asia. Then you have the Il Khanate, which is Persia. And then you have the Khanate of the Golden Horde, which we've talked about significantly within its connections to Russia. This is going to be the ones that focus and control the Russian area. Excuse me. Now, it's not working here because of the file being on Google Slides, but this is actually designed to show you the entire scope of the Muslim Empire, or sorry, excuse me, the Mongol Empire in terms of expanded. But for the purposes of this, we saw its greatest extent on this map here. Now this is the beginnings of, we can at least look at it in terms of the beginnings of Genghis Khan's influence when he is able to unite the Mongolian tribes and start his expansion here. Okay. Mongol rule is important. You guys need to star this slide specifically in terms of reviewing for the test for Chapter 12 for multiple choice questions and essays. The Mongols needed to be able to rule effectively to control such a large empire very quickly and being kind of low in population. But there's going to be some positives and negatives to that. First off, in the areas that they wiped out and destroyed, a lot of these areas never recover. If you go to a lot of these places in Central Asia today, they're still damaged or recovering from what Genghis Khan was able to do 800 years ago. Now, the Mongols were very ferocious in war, but they were tolerant in peace because they didn't have the population to rule over this vast empire to control just through their needs. So they had to be tolerant. They allowed people to keep their cultural beliefs and cultural and religious affiliations and pretty much how they ruled. And what this does is it pretty much allows them to keep expanding. It allows their rulership to take place. And in a lot of cases, through the years, the Mongols are actually going to develop the cultural beliefs and traditions along with their own, keeping their own, with the people they come in contact with. In particular, if you look at the Khanate of the Golden Horde or the Il Khanate, a majority of Muslims, because they come in contact with, or a majority of Mongols, because they come in contact with Muslim peoples, actually convert to Islam. And these two Khanates become Islamic states, and they're still Mongol. Now, as these developments and cultural beliefs and diffusion between Mongols and other peoples take hold, these cultural differences are going to develop between the various khanates, and it's going to lead to a splitting up of the empire eventually. So those four khanates are going to split along differences of cultural traits and beliefs that they've developed with the contact of people that they're with. So, but that eventually will take place. Now, this is also an important one. So by the mid 1200s, so in the years after Genghis Khan's death, for about a period of 100 years, you're going to have what's going to be known as the Pax Mongolica, or the Mongolian peace. And stability basically reigns across the Mongolian world. Sorry that I keep saying Muslim with Mongolian. I apologize for that. But basically the reason this happens is you have rulership over an entire swath from China to Europe. And even though it's different, maybe across different khanates, there is a united idea of currency. There's a united idea of control, and trade is pushed very much by the Mongolians because they value riches, and travelers from all over this Asia, Africa, and Europe, like Ibn Battuta or Marco Polo, or so forth, are able to move from east to west in trade. Now, there's the benefits of that. You see ideas and innovations such as gunpowder, Chinese porcelain, and so forth moving between these regions. But there's also a bad thing to it. When we see connections of cultures, a globalization, if you will, you see the good, but there's also a bad. We see that today going on right now with the coronavirus. That's a bad thing that comes out of our globalization. Well, the bubonic plague is going to really be carried westward from China, really by the spread or the Pax Mongolica that's developed by the Mongols. And we'll talk more about the bubonic plague specifically in chapter 14. All right. Now, that's all I've got for you today with the Mongols here. We're going to look more in the next section, kind of on the more on the rule of the Mongolian Empire in its later stages, kind of the ending of the last half of the Pax Mongolica, and what happens to the Mongolian Empire when it falls, or why it falls. That's what we'll do in the next lecture. I hope you guys enjoyed this. If you have any questions, please let me know. I'll see you next time.